a lot that we need to reduce consumption of things. We need to implement a carbon tax that is fair, and I wonder whether then if money is already available, how do we solve, for example, the collective action problem that you were mentioning before? Because at that point it seems to be more a societal issue and a political issue.
Yeah, of course. So there's a big problem about this collective action issue, and if you have a conversation with almost anybody and you say, we think that let's say lead in the water is a bad idea, and if you drink lead, if you give it to your kids, you're going to get brain damage. But I have a house, and you have a house, and you have a house, and I don't have time to go and tell the utility to stop putting lead in the water, so you do it. It's like you don't have time. So it's a collective action problem. Like, how are we going to get it? And we realize at some point that either somebody's very agitated and they quit their job and they become the lead person, or we meet here and we say, okay, look, you do 1% of the job, you do 1% of the job, we'll work together, and we will be enough of a coalition. So collective action problems can be overcome if you have a small enough coherent group that's willing to put in the time, given that it's a good idea to make the collective action. So that's first. You have to have a group that's in favor of something. The environmental community is entirely not united as far as most of these ideas. They say in the United States, in Washington State, which is right south of British Columbia, there was a ballot measure to have a carbon tax in Washington State, almost exactly the same as British Columbia. And that ballot was voted on and it was defeated. The energy industry actually didn't oppose it actively. Half the energy industry was like, we don't like it. The other half was like, we don't care. The major opposition came from the Sierra Club, which is an environmental organization, because they didn't like the idea that the carbon tax was going to go to reduce income taxes. They wanted it to go to environmental projects. So they said, we're not going to allow a carbon tax that doesn't fund our projects. So this to me is a bit of a tragedy. Now, so you have this kind of problem within the green community, let's say. Now, you also have an energy industry which has a lot of money, like more than almost any industry in the world, the energy industry has money. And they are, in the United States, if you've been following it, they have an amazing ability to make people question actual reality. And so, and they're borrowing techniques from the cigarette companies that for decades were successful in saying, we're not quite sure that cigarettes are killing us, let's study it more. So now you have politicians who are also being paid by energy companies, who are hearing testimony from scientists that are owned by energy companies, say, we're not quite sure. So that blocks this kind of, the small group from actually having an impact, because there's a big group, or a more rich group that's trying to oppose it. And this is a very tricky problem, even in domestic politics. When you go internationally, it becomes much more tricky because the developing world says, we need to develop, you did it with coal, we're going to use coal, unless you pay us. And the rich countries are like, no, we don't want to. So then they say, fine, we're going to do what we're doing. So there's many different layers of this problem. And my impression is that we should try and resolve them on the local scale first, without trying to go hit these home runs, international coalitions to save the world, because that's just not happening. And so that's why what I would put up put forward as a policy proposal. I make sure that the policy proposal I think is the most likely to happen is this: there is going to be a carbon tax. All the money goes to the energy companies, and that's how the energy companies might get interested in a carbon tax, because let's say there's two energy companies and they split the money half and half. If one can reduce their carbon component, then they're making money. So that is really exciting to them. So the energy companies, essentially, unless you bribe them to ditch a business model which has worked very well for 100 years, they're going to oppose this tooth and nail. And the public, if it's uninformed about the impact of carbon taxes, if they are divided in terms of what should we do as policy, we should be vegan, we should ride bikes, then they're also not united around a policy. And by the way, if you say markets and prices and taxes, a bunch of environmentalists who hate markets are just not even going to talk to you. So that's a real problem. So that's no answer. Yes, please.
I'm not sure if I understood how you will implement the carbon tax. Will the individuals be paying when they consume?
No,
What's the idea?
Yeah,
behind it?
the most common way to do any kind of tax is to go to the simplest place to charge that tax. So a carbon tax would be charged at what's called the wellhead or the mine head. And if you had inside the EU, you have coal mines in Poland, you've got natural gas in Groningen. When the gas comes out of the ground, you pay the tax. And that means the wholesale market prices already reflect the carbon tax. So you as a consumer will be paying that tax as part of, like the same way you pay VAT or BTV. You pay it as part of the price.
So you will increase the price of the energy?
Yes, you have to increase the price of the energy.
And that will impact the livelihoods of the poor people.
Yeah.
That's what I just said about 5 minutes ago. The poor people are refunded their own share of the carbon tax, so poor people would make money from a carbon tax.
And I think that, yeah, I mean, we will all pay the tax, but at the same time also, it will rise the price of energy, but to a certain level, right? To the level that renewable energy technologies will become favorable.